Hello and welcome to this webinar from the Princess Royal Training Awards on helping you making the most of your evidence in your application form. These are of course an evidence-based award, so a key part of the application is how you use the evidence, and of course the assessors are focusing on that. I'm Michael Osbaldeston here in City Guilds Group in the heart of the City of London on what's almost a spring-like morning, and we're joined today by one of our assessors, Fenella Tallon, down in Brighton. Fenella, good morning.
Good morning, Michael.
Welcome to the webinar, and welcome to all of you who've joined us today. Now, one of the really important things about today is that you get a chance to ask questions of one of the assessors. And you'll see on the right-hand side of your screen, you've got the opportunity to type questions as we go along, and we'll address them at the end of the webinar. So do please feel free to ask whatever you want to ask of either team here or Fenella, and we'll do our very best at the end of the webinar, towards the end of the webinar, to answer your questions. So we're going to explore the need for relevant evidence, and we're going to understand what relevant evidence means during the course of this webinar. We're going to have a chat with Fenella as one of the assessors and understand exactly what she and the rest of the assessor team are looking for. And we're also going to be sharing some top tips around evidence. And like I said, we're going to be answering your questions, and hopefully by the end of the webinar you'll have a better understanding of what evidence will support your application so that you're successful in gaining a Princess Royal Training Award 2018. Now, just to remind everybody, there are of course 3 hallmarks of excellence that make up the Princess Royal Training Awards. First of all, we need to see that your organisation is committed to training and learning and development, whether formal or informal, and that it forms very much part of the DNA of your organisation. You need to understand the programme that you've designed and delivered, and understand what the drivers were for that programme, and in fact how you've measured it, how it's been delivered, and in the third hallmark, the impact that it's had on both your organisation, and of course the people, because obviously we need to see evidence of both of those. So that's what the Princess Royal Training Awards are designed around, and we're here to identify the impact that training has on an organisation and the evidence of that impact. And as you all know, it's a matter of reaching a standard. So nobody's competing with anybody else, everybody is competing against a standard, which means it doesn't matter which sector you're in, it doesn't matter how big you are, how small you are, whether you're public, private or not-for-profit, you can still attain the standard of excellence required by the Princess Royal Training Awards and gain that royal recognition for the impact that training has on your organisation. So, Fenella, what's the purpose of the applicants providing evidence? What does it do?
Well, it helps the assessor to assess the application. It helps us to get an inside information and evidence to support that you've got a strategy, you've got a reason why you did the training, and then to back up what you actually did, and then to provide us with support that you had an impact, the impact that you might have been expecting, or maybe the impact that you weren't expecting. But it allows you to give us concrete information from your organisation that you have achieved what you wanted to achieve. So, for example, if you wanted to mention about your strategy for the training that you wanted to deliver, you may actually want to include an extract from your learning and development policy, from your annual report, in the evidence part of the application.
So, Fenella, when the assessors see evidence on the application form, they only need to see a little part, because what the applicants are trying to do is tease you into wanting to find out more, aren't they?
That's absolutely it. And there is a word count on the in the application form and in the evidence part, which we'll go on to later. So you haven't got a huge amount of words to tell us perhaps everything that you want to. So you need to be very focused in the statements that you give us in the evidence. So you may want to pick out one particular salient point and include that.
I mean, one of the things we talk about is the application form being a box, don't we? And if it's in the box, the assessors
Yes.
can look at it on validation. If it's outside the box, they can't. Do you want to just sort of run through that idea with the people on the webinar today, Fenella?
Yes, thank you. It's a really good point. Basically, the assessors can only look at what is actually written in your application, because the first bit of the assessment process is the team of assessors looking at your paper-based application, which includes, of course, the evidence. So we need to, anything that you reference in that application form and in the evidence, we can then go on to ask you more about if we come and do a validation visit. If you've not actually mentioned it in the body of the application or in the evidence, then we can't actually take it into consideration. So it's really important that you reference things in either the body of the application or in the evidence section, so that we can then ask you further information about it. So you may only need to reference something like your L&D policy or some evidence of impact. You only need to give us a reference or a taste of it, and then we can ask you more about it when we come to visit you. And we may well want to see the actual report or the strategy that it's come from, so that we can see that it actually exists.
A really important part of the application form and the evidence, Fenella, is bringing the application to life, isn't it? And one of the things that you often talk about when we speak to the assessors is the testimonials from the learners and seeing the impact on the
Yes.
learners. I mean, what sort of difference does that make for you as an assessor?
Well, that really does help bring the application to life, Michael. It's a really important part, because often we'll see very impressive statistics on how you've improved your bottom line or whatever it is, but often we call it the learner voice is absent, and we do like to see what impact has it had on the trainees themselves, on your staff. So if you include a quote from one of the trainees in the evidence, that can be really helpful, because it will give a taster to us of actually what was the impact on the individual. And then when we come to visit you, we will ask to see a number of learners, and we can have more in-depth discussions with them at that stage. But it's important to include a quote or quotes from some trainees in the evidence. But don't fill the evidence up with just that, because there's lots of other things that we want to see as well. But it is really important to have a quote if you can.
Now, you just referenced the validation visit, Fenella, and in fact, these are a three-stage awards, aren't they? So we start off by the assessors will look at each of the application forms, and in fact, each form is read by three assessors: the chief assessor, the team leader, and the assessor. Yep. So there's a really broad overview. The validation visit takes place on those we think which are in striking distance of achieving an award, and then finally the commission make the final adjudication. So it's important, I think, to understand that process. So in terms of the validation visit, which I have to say is as far as we in the office are concerned, the most exciting part, because we have a group of ambassadors from City and Guilds who come out and join you assessors on those visits, and they are enormously motivating and absolutely fascinating. Just run us through how that validation visit takes place, and what are the sort of things that are happening during it?
Well, the validation visit, as you say, it really brings the application to life, because we're actually meeting you, we're coming to your offices, we're seeing your staff, and we're really digging into the application process and seeing what you've done. So what happens? The first part of the process is, as I was saying before, the paper-based application. And then if you're successful and we ask to come to a visit, we will give you a detailed letter setting out what we would like to do in the visit and who we would like to see. And we also set out what we would like to see in terms of evidence. So as I was mentioning before, if you've referenced perhaps your annual report, or you might have referenced a policy, or you might have given us a taster of some of the impact measures that you've put in place, we will ask to see more of that. So we will ask to see perhaps the whole report, and we might ask to see things that learners have come up with as part of their learning process. Sometimes that's physical things they might actually have made. If you've told us about that in the application, the chances are we will ask to see it when we come on the visit. But going back to that analogy about the box, if there is something within the box, i.e. you've put it in your application or you've included it in your evidence, then we will ask to see it when we come to visit you. But if you've not included it in the body of the application, then we won't know about it and we won't know to ask to see it. So that's why it's really important to include everything that you can in your application, so that then we can come and actually look further into it when we come and see you. That's part of the validation bit of the visit, is to actually check some of the things that you have referenced in your application.
I think it's really important, that idea of a box, because as assessors you can delve deeply. So you've got long arms, but you can't wander around the outside of it, can you?
Yes,
That's the
absolutely.
way
Yes, that's right.
So assessors, you can always recognise an assessor because they've got very long arms to delve deep into boxes. But I think the application is a lovely balance between the story, the narrative, the holistic approach to telling the story, and providing those points of evidence along the way so that we know what you're saying is supported. But it's also worth saying, I think, too,
Yeah.
Fenella, isn't it, that if you don't get past the first stage, or indeed if you don't get past the second stage, the assessors provide a quite detailed feedback report to all the applicants. Do you want to just run through what sort of things
Yes.
we put into that?
What we do, we structure the feedback from the hallmarks that you've applied to in the application. So as Michael mentioned earlier, there are 3 hallmarks. So we structure the feedback around those. So we look at what you've said in the application, and then we will give you feedback on the good things that we've seen and the good things that you've done, and then we look at perhaps areas where you might be able to improve what you've said in the application, and perhaps areas for development as well. So that's generally how it works, and then we do an overview at the end, and we hope that you find this useful to be able to look at your own L&D strategy or your own training program. And indeed, some people, if they found that they've applied a little bit early for the training awards, and you can tell that often if you don't really have a lot of evidence to provide us in Hallmark 3, which is where we're looking at the impact, we will say that in the feedback letter. So that we'll give you some pointers about what we expect to see in that part of the form, and what you can do as an organisation to improve that bit of the application.
I mean, we do recognise that it takes time to complete the application form, so almost a quid pro quo on it is if you don't get an award, and we hope people do, because we're trying to catch people in and not catch people out. So we're trying to identify opportunities to celebrate excellence, not find fault, which I think is an important part.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
the validation visit, Fenella, isn't an inspection, is it?
No, absolutely not. And we try our best to make sure it isn't like that. It's more a collaborative process where we're coming to meet you and find out more about you, and to celebrate your success with you, because we often find that particularly the trainees who we meet find it as quite a useful process to go through, and it helps them to reflect on what their learning has been and how they put it into practice. So we want it to be a very positive experience, and not to feel like we're coming in to inspect, because we're not.
And I think it's really important to stress that we're about finding success stories and celebrating excellence and sharing best practice, not finding fault and nitpicking. So I think, again, that helps people
Absolutely.
understand our approach to the awards, and hopefully that makes a difference the way people see them. I think just to repeat on some of the do's and don'ts, it's about making sure that the evidence is relevant to what you've told us in the application form, and keeping it focused in a way that makes sense to the assessor. And I think it's also useful to make sure in the application form that you somehow indicate in the text where there's where there's evidence attached to that. So just highlighting in the text that there is evidence to look at. I think it's really important, because if it's not there, like Fenella said, then the assessor team can't have a look when they come out to do the validation visit. There are a couple of things about don't do, and that's there aren't many words to play with. The word count is deliberately short, small, because it has to be doable, it has to be manageable. So be careful not to repeat what you say in the text, because that's not the best use of words. And it's also important not to attach irrelevant material. So it's a matter about being focused on the evidence. And in fact, there are quite significant limitations on what can be provided in terms of evidence. Each hallmark, and there are 3 hallmarks, can have 1 document. So that's three potential attachments of evidence. No more than 2 megabytes per attachment, and no more than 500 words on each of the attachments. And unfortunately, we can't look at external links, because the assessors won't have the capacity to link through to do that. Now, in the first year, we didn't have limits, and in fact, we have an assessor still working on one of the application forms, because we didn't actually have somebody sending 85 different attachments. So we decided that to make it fair for everybody, and to make it's a level playing field, everybody has exactly the same opportunity to tell their story, to gather their evidence, and present it to the assessors in a way which means we can actually do it, and the assessors realistically can actually manage to address that evidence in a realistic way. So Fenella, let's just go through a few of the sort of things, the typical examples, the sort of things that really help underpin an application for the assessor team.
Yeah, absolutely. The examples you've got here are great examples. We really like business metrics. So we really like to know, where were you in the before picture, and then what happened? What was the after picture? So we like comparative data to support that. And it's brilliant if you can provide that in a chart or a graph, because it's so easy to look at, and it doesn't take many words to set up a chart or a graph, and it's just a really easy and clear way for the assessor to get a quick overview and a picture of what you're trying to tell us. Also, we like the statistics as well, especially if they're something that have been perhaps published, or also if there are statistics that are relevant to your sector. So you may not have actually internal statistics to tell us, but say if you're telling us about a sector business need or a skills shortage or something like that, and there are statistics that you can draw on that have been put together by somebody else, that's absolutely fine. We like to hear that sort of information, because although we've got a range of expertise in the assessor team, we don't all know every sector inside out, and it's good to be able to reference your the needs and the things that you're telling us in the form with external statistics in some cases. And as we were saying before, testimonials from staff, quotes, and from customers as well. If that's relevant, they all add life to the application, and assessors really like to see those, because it just gives us a taste of what you've been doing from somebody's personal perspective, that we can then go and validate if we come and see you at a later stage.
I think a couple of other things to add are, if you're going to give a percentage, give us a baseline number, because otherwise percentages can be quite misleading. I think cause and effect is important too, isn't it, Fenella, in terms of the narrative and in terms of the evidence? Do you want to just explore that, how that plays out for you?
Yes, the sort of we do like to know the before picture, and it's funny, there's often we don't actually see that, because people just tell us about what they've done and not perhaps why they did it and what were the reasoning behind it, but we do like to see that sort of preamble, I guess, in terms of the why. Why did you do this? What were the reasons for it, and what evidence have you got to support that? And then we can follow through the journey that you've made through the hallmarks in the application until the impact at the end. So it helps us to see the whole picture, really.
I'm going to actually pick up a question now, because we've had a question about somebody said they got photo snapshots in the evidence, and does the word count include any words in the photographs? I think words in the photographs are fine, unless you're actually photographing the front page of the Guardian or something. But one of the things that I would, and I'm sure you'll agree with this, Fenella, is use photographs carefully, because they've got to tell a story and they've got to support part of the statement that's being made. But would you agree with that?
Yes, I would. We have had pictures of learners starting a course, and that's fine, and it's nice to see their smiling faces, but it would be better if we could see them perhaps winning an award or something like that. That tells more of a story to us than just seeing who they are, if that makes sense.
Yeah, don't forget we can't do hyperlinks. However, once the assessors come on a validation visit, they can look at videos, they can look at other presentations, as long as they're referenced within the application form. So if you've got things that you want, if you've got a video about what the learners did, or a video about the chief exec saying this is absolutely wonderful, we can look at that when we come out, but we can't do the hyperlinks during the application, the initial application form. And in fact, if you look at the application form this year, we've redesigned it so that the supportive material and the guidance document is all in the same form. So there are examples of supporting evidence throughout the application form to give people a steer as to the sort of things that might be useful. And there's a link there, so I'm sure if you've looked at the application form already, you'll have seen some of those examples that you can look at. So Fenella, how about some top tips? Because our chief assessor, Paul, who's not with us today, is a great man for the top tips, and I know that it runs through the whole of the assessor world. So what are your top tips?
Yes, so yes, the top one is a good one. Use clear headlines to describe each piece of information, and please, please, please don't use jargon or acronyms that aren't explained, because otherwise we spend hours googling things, and different acronyms mean different things in different sectors. So please do explain and describe each piece of information, because that really helps us. And as I was saying before, if you want to copy and paste extracts from lengthy documents, so we just want the bit that we're interested in, the salient point that backs up something that you've said in your application, you can copy and paste that. That's absolutely fine. Or take a screenshot of the relevant bit and crop it down. That's absolutely fine. And as well, you can snip tables and graphs to just give us the most relevant bit, so that we don't have other things that we perhaps might not need to look at in terms of your application. And if you can highlight key information in colour, that would be great, because we can that will help us to look at things more easily. But the best thing is, please keep it short and concise and easy to read, because as assessors we are going through and actually scoring your application. Each of the hallmarks has got a number of points that can be achieved in each part of it, so we are actually going through and giving you a score for the relevant various bits. So if you can keep to short sentences, it makes it much easier for us to read and then score. And it's probably easier for you to write as well. It's easier for you to, it helps.
Because on the application form, it does indicate that not just the criteria, but the scores against each of the criteria, doesn't it, Fenella? And that has to be a guide, that has to be an important part of completing the form.
Yeah.
So the hallmarks are important, and if you haven't already done it, you can download the hallmarks on the right hand side of your screen. We're coming towards the end, so if you've got more questions, do please email them through to us. I mean, once you've shown that your organisation is committed to learning and development, and it's at the very heart of what you do, what you need to do is tell us why you've done what you've done, tell us how you did it, and tell us what was the impact. And I think that's quite a succinct way of putting it. And of course, Fenella, the evidence is very much the audit trail, isn't it?
It is, absolutely. So you mentioned something in the body of your application, and then you can give us the evidence from documents or whatever in that part of the form. And it is our audit trail. We can say, oh look, this is what they've wanted to do, and this is the information that they've given us to back it up. So yes, and then the audit trail goes on if we come to the validation visit, and then we can actually ask to see those documents in real life. So that's what we mean by audit trail. We can follow it right through from the form to actually in person.
And of course, we're here to help. My colleagues Remi and Laura are more than happy to take any questions, either on the phone or by email, and we will continue to be supported right the way through to the 29th of March, which is the closing date. So no Easter eggs until you sent your application form in by Maundy Thursday. We are very happy to answer questions, and like I said, this is about catching you in, not catching you out. So if you want to have a conversation about the evidence, or you want more guidance, or you want us to help and understand some of the elements of the application form, don't be afraid to ask, because that's what we're doing right the way through to the end of March. We've got another question is about how will you know that we've got your application form? And this is a really important one. Every application form is acknowledged. If you apply on the online system, you'll get an automatic link back to tell you we've received it, and it'll be in our system. If you choose to apply through a Word document, as an email, as an attachment, then we will guarantee to get back to you within 48 hours of you sending it. So if you apply and you don't hear back, please get in touch with us, because it means that your application is somewhere in the ether, and we don't want anybody to miss out because the IT system somewhere has done what IT systems do, as far as I can understand, regularly. So please, if you've applied and you hear nothing from us, do come back to us, do ask us, and we will investigate, and you can send it on. Also, if you click the send button and you've forgotten to put your attachments on, your evidence on, just give us a ring, drop us an email, and send them separately. We don't penalise people for not doing it right. It's not, like I say, we're catching you in, not catching you out. So if something goes wrong and something doesn't quite right, or as last year, somebody sent the wrong application form because they'd worked on a previous version and sent that, and they rang up in a complete panic, and we could assure them, no, we don't worry about things like that. If you tell us something like that's happened, then we're very understanding, and we will address it, and the team will do all they can to support and make sure it all comes right in the end for you. So we are coming to the end of this webinar. It will be available online if people want to listen to it again. We are here to help as much as we can. We can't write your application forms for you, but we can support you as much as we can. I'd like to thank my colleague Remi in the office here, who's been looking after the technology, which is always an essential bit of doing webinars. I'd like to thank my colleague Fenella, and I'm sure you're looking forward to receiving the application forms, Fenella, true?
Yes, absolutely. It's an absolute pleasure and a privilege, actually, to read your applications, and we really look forward to receiving them this year.
And I'd like to thank all of you who've been on the webinar. I don't need to wish you good luck, because you are putting together superb application forms with all the right evidence attached to it. But we are looking forward to receiving those application forms, and we're looking forward even more to you being a successful recipient of a Princess Royal Training Award 2018. And so for today, I'm going to say good day and wish you all the very best in your application. Goodbye.